So perfect. It's another Thursday evening, and we want to welcome you to the next Mars webinar. I think before we start, I think it's just very important as well to briefly let you know that unfortunately our, let's say, our standard moderator Lutz Vollmer is unfortunately ill, so he can hardly speak. So that would also mean that at the end of the day, you will need to only listen to me and to our guest, Thorsten Peske. I think also from my side, obviously, all the best wishes to Lutz, and I'm pretty much sure that you will also be able to listen to him again end of October in our next webinar. End of October, just keep that in mind. We'll have as well a guest from the German GBA here as well, where we will discuss about the experimental coverage. But before having said that, I will try to repeat what Lutz is normally doing, meaning I will as well give you a quick and brief introduction. No need to introduce myself, obviously, this time, and then we'll introduce and go into the specific topic. Today, it's about Austria. So obviously, very briefly, just to let you know who we are, who is Mars. I think we are the German-speaking market access experts, meaning we cover Austria, Germany, Switzerland with respect to price and reimbursement strategies, but also the actual submissions, the negotiations, and also if you need to have support in terms of health economics. By the way, we have also just mentioned negotiations, and just for those of you who have not followed us last time, end of August, where we had, I think, a great session also with our great colleague and friend, Bibiane Schulte-Bosse. She's a lawyer from Germany, where we have also discussed about the actual negotiation, but we have also on top of that, our virtual reality preparation camps for the different negotiations which might happen in the various countries. Oops, that was a bit too fast. So you see already as well, not only today, where we have Dr. Thorsten Peske from Austria with us as a guest, but also next time, October 27th. Keep that in mind. Very important that we have Dr. Matthias Perlet from the GBA with the topic, the good, the bad, the ugly. That doesn't mean that we need to see who is the good, the bad, and the ugly between Matthias Perlet, Lutz Vollmer, and myself, but it's rather the kind of question around the experimental coverage, which is a special topic, especially also for drugs in for medical devices in Germany. And in November, we have again our good friend from the KV Westphalia-Lippe, Dr. Matthias Flume, with respect to regional drug budgets, KVs as the hidden watchdogs in Germany. Maybe put a question mark behind that. Even though that our moderator Lutz is not with us, obviously feel free to ask your questions. Obviously use the Q&A function or directly put that into the comment box also here in Zoom. And Thorsten and I will be able, I think, pretty much sure that we will also get through all of the questions you might have, and then we can discuss that as well at the end of the session.
I hope you can hear me now, Stefan. Because
yes, Thorsten, perfect. I can hear you. Very good. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. So just following up on that, I mean, if you have missed maybe the previous webinars, as also just mentioned, we have the negotiation part with Bibiane Schulte-Bosse out of August, but we have as well others, such as the one end of July that was ahead of the German elections, which has just been happened last week on Sunday, or also a couple of others like the one in June in terms of DGAS or further ones. Just watch that out and maybe also subscribe to our YouTube channel. But now coming back, obviously, Lutz is not with us, but you know myself directly. A big hello from Weil am Rhein in the southwest of Germany, but also a big hello to Dr. Thorsten Peske to Vienna from Supersonic Pharma. Hello, Thorsten.
Hello from Vienna. Nice to join you tonight.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thorsten, we will hear from you in probably roughly 10 minutes time, 12 minutes time. I will quickly introduce the topic, and then I'm obviously happy to hear some of the thoughts and your kind of opinions on the topic today. Oops, that was too fast. Whether there's really more than Mozart, Sisi, and Sacher cake, and for sure there is more. And I think today the topic is not so much on the great culture in Austria, but really focusing on the pragmatic reimbursement pathways in Austria. There's a question mark, but I think it might also be a kind of clear statement. So let's just see. I will quickly introduce and then obviously happy to move over to Thorsten. So Austria, very briefly in a nutshell, where I would say this is what a lot of, let's say, people, especially in the market access health economic area, would say this is the pathway, which is not absolutely 100% right. I think generally the manufacturer has to submit an application, a dossier. Then there's the Association of the Austrian Social Insurance Institutions, which is the Dachverband in Vienna, and it's then also being assessed by the Pharmaceutical Evaluation Board, the HEC, in general. It's kind of two-step approach. You will get a bit of more details as well in a couple of next minutes. Then I think most relevant, put maybe payers in kind of quotes, because the Ministry of Health is obviously not directly the payer, but you have, let's say, national and local differences. So you have the Ministry of Health, the Dachverband, the Association of the Austrian Social Insurance Institution, and then also the Federal Procurement Agency. I think Thorsten might as well speak very briefly on that. And then on a local level, obviously, and that's also where we would maybe need to move a bit away from that, as we called it, nutshell, and the kind of standard knowledge, I think, where we would then also go into the local specifics, such as the Hospital Formulary Commission and the purchasing committees. Why do I mention that? I think it's really important, and that's, I think, where sometimes the kind of differences are really that important. The pricing reimbursement process depends on the drug type. So if you have a product, you need to differentiate, first of all, if it's a retail drug or if it's a hospital drug. And that is, I think, then also driving your formal or maybe non-formal pricing and reimbursement process. So if you have a retail drug, it's basically what I have just said on the last slide. It's a kind of very formalized procedure, and we have that as well, a very quick kind of a slide set or slide as well in a minute with the different kind of boxes. And if it's not a retail drug, but a hospital drug, then you don't have a formal P&R process. So this is maybe then what I was mentioning as the kind of pragmatic reimbursement pathway, potentially. And obviously, it always depends as well on the viewpoint. So I think if we speak here about a pragmatic pathway, it's probably more from the manufacturer side. I think there are other discussions from the payer side as well. So also inpatient pathway looks maybe still a bit, not really messy, but still a lot of different boxes here. I think the important point is here probably on the right-hand side. It's more around funding. That's also why I would say it's not the kind of really formal pricing reimbursement kind of process. Maybe as well important, and watch out. I think maybe Thorsten could also speak quickly about that. There's also a kind of pilot since 2018 on the Hospital Pharmaceutical Evaluation Board. I think that's probably still my understanding. It's still a bit more the kind of future, but let's just see what we'll have here. But I think in a kind of really kind of summarized way, how to get your funding in the inpatient setting, it's really as we have it here with the simple kind of arrows. I mean, there's first of all the question, you need to have some kind, somehow a reimbursement within the inpatient setting, the diagnosis-based versus performance-based, the so-called MEL case flat rates is a kind of, let's call it kind of DRG system, what other people might know from other countries. And I think the important component is probably on the second box on the right. When you start on the top here, I think costly drugs are included in the MEL catalog. And the important point in here is basically that those kind of, let's say, funding applications need to be done by the individual clinician and or by the hospital department. So you see already that the request needs to come from the clinicians, then also to the respective drug commission of the hospital. I think maybe, Thorsten, I think my experience, but I think would be quite happy, obviously, to get your insights as well in a bit. I think it's also here important that it's not only the price and the rebate itself, which might be a bit of a driver, but I think it's also a lot of times, I think the experience of that requesting physician with that specific drug, which might also drive a positive kind of decision or a positive support, let's say, from the drug commission in a hospital. And then finally, it obviously goes to the let's say kind of the application for reimbursement to the medical director, and then there's finally the negotiations with the manufacturers. And I think looking forward as well to some of the slides as well Thorsten has in some minutes on that. Very briefly here as well, just for cost-intensive therapies, we've just said that. I think sometimes we could as well have different kind of agreements here, risk share agreement, question mark. I think that's also a bit dependent, I think, on the drug itself, but also then I think what is important is what is mentioned in the second sub-bullet here, prices are confidential. And I think this is also probably then the important driver when thinking about this a specific kind of negotiation and potential agreement on that local level. So moving a bit away, I would potentially say, and that's a question mark now in the title, on the pragmatism here in Austria. I could still say potentially the Austrian box system is maybe still a bit of a pragmatic pathway. We might know and might potentially compared with the AMNOG. I think obviously we know that the AMNOG is, let's say, more kind of monster sometimes in terms of submissions. We need to submit sometimes kind of books in Germany, but I think if we see the templates which are available then for those kind of different box systems, I think it might be seen more as a kind of pragmatic pathway, really focusing maybe a bit more on the kind of important drivers for such a decision. But let's just see, I think it's just a different kind of viewpoint. I think important, and that's what people I think might also have in mind, that you have the different kind of boxes here, which might then also drive not only the decision, but obviously also, for example, the prescribing behavior in a way. I think we see sometimes here, I think the nice German word Chefarzt, which then sometimes necessary for reimbursement or for kind of approval to use it. But obviously as well, I think we have here with the different boxes, let's say kind of thresholds with the kind of maximum prices which could be charged then for those products. Not going now further into the details here, I think also Thorsten might maybe mention a couple of other examples and a couple of further points in here. And we have as well in a few slides further a focus on the drug prices, which might then also be of interest. But ultimately, what are the core principles of the assessment? I think this is, I would say, the kind of standard what we also probably know from any other country, at least in Europe, right? I mean, drugs are evaluated for their so-called probably therapeutic value. We could also say added benefit maybe. And I think on the next slide, we have a nice figure where I think you could also maybe get that. For example, if you know the system in France and Germany, I think you could see a quite similar kind of trend in here. But I think important is here probably the two sub-bullets. Drugs are related in the licensed indication. I think that's always a kind of question as well when, let's say, companies are approaching us at least, and also obviously in comparison to available alternatives. I think this might as well be one of the core drivers as well. For example, not only for the added benefit, but I think also when we discuss maybe about the prices. Ultimately, what is still around the, let's say, principles or the drivers for such a positive assessment is quite clearly, as probably in a lot of countries as well, where we have different HTAs, randomized clinical trials, and or obviously even better if you have a systematic review and maybe even a meta-analysis available. Added benefit, that's I think what I try to say as well a bit before, and obviously just have a look. I think that slide set as well available on the GÖK website is really a quite nice one where you see even further kind of analysis included. This one I have just borrowed as well, where you could see a quite nice, let's say, overview on the self-classification for that, call it added benefit, and we can say reality or just, let's say, the decision afterwards with the different kind of submissions. I think if you start from the left-hand side, Z1, I think is not probably the biggest kind of, let's say, surprise if you see what is included there. So no added therapeutic value products. mostly, I think, generic. So there's probably not so much of a difference. But I think if you then start from Z2, which is a further therapeutic option with similar benefit, down to the point very much on the right-hand side with Z6, which is substantial added therapeutic benefit for the majority of patients, then you see already a kind of big mismatch. So at the end of the day, the companies who submitted had basically rated their own kind of added benefit, let's say significantly more often higher than what they have finally gotten in the assessment procedure in Austria. Is that a surprise? Probably not so much. Why not? I think if we have a look on the kind of, let's say, price drivers here as well, you as well just automatically see the higher, let's say, your kind of, let's say, added benefit level, the more flexible you might as well be in terms of your pricing. And we know that as well from other countries. I think here I would probably not so much think about Germany, but probably also something what we see, for example, in France. So if you have a substantial added benefit, Z6 and Z5, you might have a higher price, and you need to have as well a pharmacoeconomic study. And if you go obviously a bit further down the line, you have further kind of thresholds included there. I think one of my kind of few last slides here as well is then the external reference prices, which is obviously a big driver. I mean, we have seen that we might have different kind of, let's say, thresholds as well with the different kind of boxes. You see that on the second larger bullet. Compulsory condition for listed products, I think, is if the ex-factory price is in the if your product's in the green box, then the ex-factory price needs to be below the euro average price. If it's the yellow box, it could be or should at least be the same kind of as the EU average price. But I think, Thorsten, you might as well take a bit on that. I think important is probably as well what you see here on top of as well the average of the EU member states. And as a minimum, you need to have 2 countries included. And Austria is obviously not that country, which then also includes other EU member states than Austria, in order to then take a decision on the pricing. Having said that, I would like to again quickly transfer over and introduce over to Dr. Thorsten Peske. I think I liked, obviously, and I have borrowed that, Thorsten, from your website. I think a nice kind of graph, and you have, I think, also some kind of further pictures on your team as well. I think I liked it very briefly, the world traveler, expert for launch, business development and reshaping, and M&A, which is, I think, also an interesting point. And I think you're living already since many years in Austria, and obviously focusing especially also on the Austrian system. And I think important here is probably you and the company are not only focusing on, let's say, pricing, reimbursement, health economics, but you're really serving, I think, the big kind of line from the very early, let's say, stages in terms of how to really bring a product in also to the market, down to the point that you basically bring it, I would say, even to the patients in Austria. And having said that, I mean, Thorsten, I'm really looking forward now to listen as well to your presentation.
Thank you, Stefan, for the introduction. So concerning the slides, you go forward with the slides, or I can do that because I was unsure.
Yeah, I can do that. Just let me know when I need to move forward.
Okay, perfect. So maybe from my side, just a warm welcome again tonight that you join the webinar. I will start with a brief introduction of our company. So please, next slide, Stefan. We ourselves, understand ourselves as a full service provider for pharmaceutical companies and medical companies and healthcare companies that want to enter the Austrian market. So we can offer the full value chain starting from marketing and sales up to wholesale, and also everything that is connected to legal reimbursement. And also, if you just want to have an overview of the market. So we as the founders, we combine a variety of competencies, so we can offer you a broad range of services. Myself, as Stefan introduced, others are who in the call as well are Matthias, who is really the expert concerning all the legal aspects, and Alex and Axel are as well on the call. So maybe next slide, Stefan. You changed the slides. Okay. Yeah, that's what I mentioned before. We are a full service provider in all healthcare business. So we can go to the next slide, please. And Supersonic Pharma is headquartered in Vienna, but we serve all of Austria, also via our wholesale partner, who has 4 logistic hubs that are located all over Austria. Yeah, so let's go on the presentation. Why Austria and the 2 important segments. Next slide, please. Austria is a pharmaceutical sector, is, I think, a very small market, but not so small. If you look, you have 18,000 employees, 9.6 billion euros in products, and also 3.1 billion in production as well. On the other side, if you look at the company sizes in Austria, you have a lot of companies who are quite small. You see that down there, up to 1.5 million, 36% of the companies are here in Austria, ranging in that area. But we also have the bigger companies. But Austria has 9 million inhabitants at present, so it's more than Switzerland. And it's in European Innovation Scoreboard, it's still ranked as a really good country for innovations. And we will see later, maybe in the presentation and discussion, why it is like that. So next slide, please. As Stefan mentioned, Austria is divided in the hospital market and the public market, the extramural sector, office-based sector. And that's quite important when we come to market access and reimbursement, because you have to deal on the one side with one organization that is called the Dachverband, that is for the extramural sector, and on the other side with the hospitals. And that gives you also a good range of flexibility concerning also pricing and access strategies. If you look in the hospital sector, it's about 1/3 of all the sales in Austria, and the pharmacies, the public sector is the other 2/3 of the market. Next slide, please, Stefan. Here you see how the market is structured, and I want to go to 3 points that are marked here. The number 1 are the pharmacies. So if you look at Austria, it's quite, the number of pharmacies is not so big compared to other countries. You have 1,400 public pharmacies. One specialty in Austria maybe is, compared to other countries, you don't have really change here, a pharmacy chains in Austria. So if you go to the OTC sector, for example, or you have products that are relevant for pharmacies, you have to deal with a lot of individual pharmacies. And there are some little change, but not really big changes, chains. And also rebates are offered to pharmacies by manufacturers and wholesalers as well. And then you have a special situation in Austria, that is the self-dispensing doctors, that are HCPs in rural areas where no really a big pharmacy is around. These doctors make 1/3 or half of their income by selling drugs. So this is a market that is quite competitive. Rebates ranging here up to 40–50% of a product. And the big players here are the wholesalers that are partnering with the Hausapotheken, it's called, the self-dispensing doctors. So that is also a market segment that can be really quite interesting depending on your product portfolio. On the other side, you have the hospital sector. You have around 42 hospital pharmacies. And we will see later how the market is structured in the hospital sector. And you have to deal, when you have a hospital product, not with one central purchasing department, you have to deal with a lot of different hospitals. On the one side, it might be a little bit complex, but on the other side, it's quite good for pricing and access. The next slide, please. If you have, the outpatient sector, as Stefan mentioned, the most important institution is the Umbrella Association of Social Security Institutions, the Dachverband. That was the previous 21 social insurances we had before were reduced to 5 in 2018. And they are coordinated by the Dachverband, by the umbrella organization. And if you want to go to to the outpatient sector, you have to deal with them concerning pricing, concerning access, and how much money you get for your products at the end. If you have a medical product, so that's quite easy and structured way. If you have a medical device, at present it's the insurance institution you see below, institution for public sector employees, railway and mining. And that is, if you have a medical device, you have to go there if you want to have reimbursement. This way is not so structured like for drugs, but it's more on single cases. But there you have to go if you want to have reimbursement for the medical device. So next slide, please. The inpatient sector, the hospital sector, that's, I think that's the projects with that are really a lot of fun always, because it's quite structured on one way, because in every region in Austria, you have one big hospital chain and you have the pharmacists there who are the responsible partners for you. And then in some regions, you also have big hospitals that are also important to deal individually. And there are 13 main hospital groups in Austria. And the most important group is in Vienna. It's Wiener Gesundheitsverbund. That is one of the most important ones. And that means at the end, if you go to the hospital sector in Austria, you need regional access strategies, because every region has its own hospital group and its own separate hospitals in the region that don't belong to a group. Austria, and that's also quite important, is center-based. So concerning oncology, for example, it's not like in Germany that you have office-based oncologists. Everything what is rare diseases or oncology, it will be started in a center. And there also you have to cope with free goods. That is quite common, for example, in rheumatology, Humira or other products. You have free samples in the hospital, and then it has to be paid later outside. Next slide, please. This is an example of a stakeholder map. If you go to a region, you really have to understand how the region is working, who are the relevant stakeholders. That goes up to politics as well, because the regions are funding to a large portion the hospital budget. And their hospital financing is could be an extra webinar, so I don't want to talk about that today. But you have to understand in every region how it works. Next slide, please, Stefan. The outpatient sector, some more slides on that. We will start with the next slide on the box system again. So that's quite good in Austria, and it's quite structured. So if you, for example, have an EMEA approval, you can right away sell the product in Austria. And you can apply for reimbursement quite easily, and that's the process is quite structured. At the beginning, you go to the red box. So red box means that the product can be reimbursed, but it has to be, a doctor has to say, okay, we need that, and there has to be approval for that. But if you're in the red box, that is a process where the Hauptverband or the Dachverband now evaluates if your product will go to the yellow box, later to the green box or to the no box. If you're on the green box, that's quite easiest, then your product is reimbursed easily. If you're in the yellow box, for example, rare diseases, a lot of medications are in that in the yellow box. It's mostly based on a single case that you get a reimbursement. And if you're in no box situation, then your products are not reimbursed. In seldom cases, they can be reimbursed. So that's how the system works in Austria. It's quite structured, but also quite easy. And the next slide, for example. Stefan, next slide. Oh, thank you. Pharmaceutical reimbursement through public healthcare insurance. The approval for inclusion in the ECO, that is the box system. You just see here on the slide how the process works. Within 180 days, normally you get a decision if your product stays in the red box, goes to a no box or to the yellow or green box. And what is also quite important is that this process is quite structured and it's an electronic process as well. And next slide, please. And also what is quite important in Austria, that the price you get in Austria is in reference to the EU average price. That is the maximum. And if you're new in the market and you can start with the pricing, you have to mention, okay, what's the reference price? And the reference price will be checked, that you see in the timelines down on a regular basis. If your product is really below the EU average price, and if you're not, then you have to pay some more, or you have to do a payback, for example. On the other side, we will see later, Austria is quite clever, not to lower EU average price, because if you have an agreement with the Dachverband, you can have pricing models behind. So that lowers the price, but it's not official, so it won't lower the EU average price. So next slide, please, Stefan. And what's quite special in Austria since some years now is the biosimilar, and for generics, we have a quite good regulation concerning pricing. For example, we had that in oncology in the last 2 years here in Austria, or also in rheumatology, Humira, for example, the biosimilar entry. If the first biosimilar comes to market, it has to be 38% cheaper than the original. After 3 months, the original has to go down 30%. If the second biosimilar comes, that has to be 15% lower. The third, 10% lower, and after 3 months, after the third, also the original price has to go down. So that is a quite, special situations for companies. And also with upcoming biosimilars, that was quite a lot of projects we had and discussions. What do we do? Sorry. And also in the hospital sector, what does it mean? How can you keep the hospitals that they stay with the original? Because in the outpatient sector, you have these price decreases. And on the next slide, sorry. On the next slide, you see also for generics, you have that regulation in Austria. That is quite similar to the biosimilar regulation. Okay, let's go to the next slide. The hospital market segment and the reimbursement. Pharmaceutical companies in Austria, they sell directly to the hospitals. So we have no central purchasing. The hospital purchasing is organized on single hospital or hospital group level. The organizational setup of purchasing difference between the regional hospital chains. Stefan mentioned, for example, drug commissions. So every hospital has a drug commission. The drug commission also has influence on the listing of drugs. And there we come to what Stefan also mentioned, to doctors. So if you have a doctor in a hospital who is really supporting a product, that can have a huge impact on the drug commission and on the listing of the product. In the last years in Austria, you see on the other hand that the pharmacists and the professional buying departments, becoming more and more professional, are gaining influence, and the doctors are losing influence. So that's why I showed before, you have to deal with the region, especially, and understand how it is working in the region and who are the stakeholders that are relevant in that region to make a decision which drugs are listed or not. If you look at the pricing models or on the general models in the hospital purchasing, it is, yeah, most, or I would say 40% are its price obtaining. So they send you a list at the pharmaceutical companies and they say, okay, give us the price for the next year. Or concerning price negotiations, if you have a product like in oncology or rare disease, it's individual negotiations. So for example, that's why some pharma companies have 4 or 5 people in market access, because they have to go to every individual hospital and negotiate with the purchasing department. Or you have a Plenumsverfahren that is quite seldom in Vienna. They don't want to have one supplier. They want to be sure that they have 2 or 3 suppliers. So they split the volume concerning several suppliers and sometimes also for 2 years. But mostly in Austria, you give the price for 1 year in the hospital. What is always possible is single ordering. So if a HCP, a doctor wants a product, he can do a single ordering. So if you have a new product, innovative product, and that's why Austria is innovation country, I think it's always possible to get it as a doctor on a single basis. And what you also see in Austria, strategic partnerships are evolving, but still, there's no central purchasing, there's no purchasing over the regions or cross-regional purchasing. And also what is not relevant in Austria are tenders. They don't have the know-how in Austria. They don't care really about what maybe EU regulation is. And that's quite important also for Austria, that if you want to make business here, you don't have to do tenders. So it's not like there's one company who covers all the market. And that's, I think, quite good as well as for a pharmaceutical company to make business here. Okay, next slide, Stefan, please. At the end, I just want to talk a little bit about the pricing also in Austria. In the intramural sector, as I said before, you have price information, individual negotiations, but also innovative pricing models. I come in 2 slides. I will talk about that. Sorry, I have something in my throat. Just a second. And in the extramural sector, you have individual agreements with companies, as I mentioned before. And also the Dachverband is talking about innovative pricing models, but they are not really in place yet. So next slide, please, Stefan. If you look in Austria, for example, in the ecosystem, you have 6,300 in the green box products at the moment, 1,500 in the yellow box, and about 100 in the red box. And out of these, let's say 7,000 to 8,000 products, 245 products have an individual pricing and payback model. And that's in the indications oncology, autoimmune, or rheumatology. And that means that with the Dachverband, you negotiate the price for reimbursement, and additional, you offer a pricing model, a payback model. So you pay back at the end 10 or 20% of your volume of the sales. And these pricing models are not transparent. That makes it difficult sometimes in Austria to understand. I showed that in the graphics. You have a ranking of products, for example. All the products have the same price, but the ranking in the system info tool, ecosystem tool that the doctor can see. You, for example, rank number 7, but your price, official price, is the same. That means PM means a pricing model. Behind that is a pricing model. It's not transparent, and you don't know how much more you have to give the Hauptverband that you be number 1. So it's quite unfair on the one side, but they're quite clever because they make a lot of money, Dachverband, with that pricing models. And this is a situation for market access that is not quite easy to cope with. At the moment, it's more payback models. So simple payback, you take amount of sales, and on that you have a rebate, and you have to pay that back after 1 year to the Dachverband. These pricing models are available with the PM in the listings, so you know which products they are, and that started 2019 here in Austria. And since that time, yeah, it grows from year to year. And yeah, that is a system or something you have to understand in the system. Next slide, please, Stefan. And then I think I'm over my time anyway. Pricing and conditions in the hospital sector. There are different rebate models in place. Mainly simple rebate schemes dominate, but also risk-sharing agreements are in the market, especially in the markets like oncology, pay-for-performance models, also based on real-world data I've seen so far. Not so many, but they are more and more discussed. Also combination pricing models for products. And what plays an important part in Austria is free of charge in the hospital. Okay, Stefan, so I hope I don't took too much time.
No.
Thank you very much for the attention. And
yes.
Yeah, we're open for questions.
Perfect.
Sorry,
thank you very much.
No.
Yeah, no worries, Thorsten. It's a great it's yeah, some of the things just floating around. But just as a kind of conclusion, I think I would still rather say that Austria, and I think you mentioned that as well, has at least I think in some parts a pragmatic pathway, but I think ultimately it also depends. I think you have the differentiation between the retail and the hospital, let's say, sector. You have, I think, still the kind of quite pragmatic pathway in the inpatient sector, but I think also it's quite clearly regulated, let's say, for example, also in the outpatient sector. I've also seen that we have already, let's say, gotten some of the questions.
Yeah,
and I
some
think,
questions.
Yes, I think one which I also basically noted down for myself, and I think we have also discussed it very briefly when we have spoken beforehand, is probably the main drivers to achieve obviously positive and successful reimbursement for medical device. Could you also elaborate a bit on that as well?
Yes, for medical device, it's like for medical drug. So if you want to get reimbursement in Austria, as I said, you have to talk to the authorities, and it's the same regulations as for a drug, but you need an additional value. So you have to prove additional value of the medical device, and then you can start negotiating a price for the medical product. But you have to deal with a single insurance that I mentioned before, and yeah, and then you get a decision at some point. Yeah, I don't know if that is for a brief answer for that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you could also speak a bit. I mean, you said it's basically similar regulation. I mean, obviously, we know that for some medical devices, it might also be difficult, obviously, let's say, to run a large randomized controlled trials. I mean, how do you see that as a kind of potential issue with the different decision makers?
That I don't see as such a potential issue, I have to say. Let me think on an example. Or maybe if the person who asked that question also can contact me directly, and I can give more detailed answer on that. Because concerning the regulations, I can also talk to my colleague I mentioned before, Matthias, who knows the regulations more in detail. Yeah,
that's yeah. I think ultimately, I think I think the important point is, I think what you said as well before, regulations are quite similar, and I think there are some specifics on the medical device, and I think also here it's important. Medical device is not directly medical device, right? It also depends, obviously, which kind of product you have then as well in your mind, and then also where it's being let's say used in the inpatient or in the outpatient sector as well.
That's also if the medical device is combined with the drug as well, that also plays
Yeah.
a role.
Yeah, exactly. I think another question which also just came in, I think it's coming from, does Austria have a system of allowing early access for innovative product in development, especially maybe in rare diseases with a high medical need, and is this reimbursed? So it's probably more the early access question.
Early access is possible in Austria. Yeah, it is. It's possible. It is also possible they get it reimbursed, but that might be more difficult, but it is possible. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. I think also there you have quite clear regulations how this is then handled with. Okay, that's perfect. I mean, you mentioned also beforehand. I mean, in the question on the medical devices, on the different insurances. I think there was a big change in the last couple of years. You mentioned from 21 to 5. Could you also maybe speak a bit about that? I mean, how that, let's say, moved down to 5, and I think that's also one of the questions. Who are those 5, and what are maybe their kind of, let's say, core focuses?
I don't know if you go back to the slide. I don't know if you can do that. It's slide number 9.
Okay, let me quickly check. I think it's one more, right? This one?
No, one more.
Yes.
Yeah. So one back.
Sorry, that one.
So here, who the insurances are. It's, for example, the insurance just below the insurance for institution and public sector employees, railway and mining. Then the SVS, that's one of the most important insurances for people who are self-employed, for example, or like us, who have our own company. And then you have the accidents insurance AUVA, which is still quite big in Austria, and the Austrian Insurance Fund and the pension insurance, the PVA, and all is covered by the umbrella association. And before you had a lot of smaller ones and local ones, and that are all now included in the umbrella association. That makes it more easy now for market access, definitely. And also, if you look at Austria, okay, it's always a big discussion in Austria if you need so many insurances or not. There was a discussion at that time, but I think now it's better than before, especially for pharmaceutical companies who want to make business here.
Okay, that's quite interesting. Okay, perfect. I think maybe one of the last question, I think that's also the question on the differences between the added benefit results of the drug assessment between Austria and Germany. I don't know whether you have done some kind of analysis.
Just one point I have to add before. Also, what is interesting, what was more interesting before, when you had more insurance companies, if you have a patient support program, for example, you had more insurances you could go to. Now it's lesser. So it was easier to start something with little insurance. Now we have to deal with bigger ones. So that might be something, if you're up to patient support programs, for example, for your products, that might be more difficult now. Sorry. On the other side, on that question, you know more the German market, so that's why I'm here now since 20 years on the German market. Okay, it's still go to Germany, but I don't know the difference really concerning the German market.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I think if I could maybe take a bit the kind of question, I mean, I would at least say, if you, that's just at least our kind of experience. I mean, if you would go to Austria and you have already an assessment in Germany, I think the added benefit given by the GBA in Germany is, let's say, also the kind of maximum you could probably also achieve in Austria. I think our experience is normally that this is a bit like the kind of game when you go into the negotiation, right? You have a kind of already upwards kind of threshold, and then it just go in one direction, at least in kind of terms of drug prices, right? And I think I would say, I think just as said, I think it might be maybe an interesting analysis just to do that between Austria and Germany. But out of our experience, I think we just see that you probably rather get a lower kind of rating in Austria when you compare it with Germany, but clearly not a better one, at least our kind of experience so far. Then we have another interesting question, again, going back to the inpatient setting, and maybe you can, again, quite nicely summarize it again. I mean, in Germany, we have that so-called added benefit, or let's say additional, let's say monetary funding through the NUP, which is a kind of Zusatzentgelt. So you have the DRG, and if you have a new kind of product which is not covered in the DRG, you could, let's say, apply in a way. It's also negotiation in there, but you could apply for that additional money, which is not yet included in the DRG. Let's say in Austria, it's a bit different, and maybe you could as well elaborate on that, especially if there's, for example, a new high-cost product available. I mean, we slightly had it in the very early beginning, but I think it would be great if you could, again, come back to that point.
Sorry, you meant in the hospital sector or on
yes,
the non-hospital?
Yes,
in the hospital sector.
In the hospital, yeah.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, in the hospital sector, it's quite regional in Austria. So you have to deal with every hospital group on that. So there's no general rule. Also, if you go to what happened in Austria the last years, some regions had innovation boards or try to set up innovation boards that look at high-cost products. And if you have a high-cost product, it was really difficult to enter that region or that hospital group. But there also differs really very much between the regions. So there's no general rule for that. That's why you have to understand the different regions and the different accesses in that region.
Yes. Okay, tough. Very good. Good. Then I would say big thank you again. I think, Thorsten, that was great insight. Thank you also for everybody coming up with your questions. I mean, just watch out. Tomorrow we'll have our new episode on the MAP, the Market Access podcast, available. This time it's not Austria, by the way, but this time it's early paid access in Switzerland, Switzerland Wonderland, ? We had a great webinar with our friend Remo Christian from Roche, one of the core pioneers in Switzerland. And tomorrow we'll have as well the podcast available on Switzerland. And obviously, and finally, watch out, maybe register already for our next webinar. Just watch out, very important. The next webinar is on the 27th of October, which is a Wednesday instead of the Thursday. And it's already a bit earlier. It's at 6 p.m. German or European time, and it's 9 a.m. Pacific time. So just watch that out. It was on the request of Dr. Matthias Pellet from the GBA. I think we have decided just to move the time, but then having him really speaking about the experimental coverage in Germany, a quite nice but also complex kind of a theme and topic here. And in November, obviously, as already said, we have Matthias Flume again on the regional drug budget, and for December we might have a quite of little surprise, probably also together with our European group, Medvance. Then watch that as well out. So thank you again, Thorsten. Thank you again back to Vienna, and have a great evening. Yeah, also, final words, Thorsten.
I want to say thank you again for listening. And if you have a question concerning Austria, just drop us an email, and we'll come back to you.
Perfect. Thank you all very much. Have a good evening, and then see and hear maybe as well tomorrow in the podcast, but clearly at our webinar end of October. Have a great evening. Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.